We are live.
Okay, it's 5 o'clock. Let's call this meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Elson,
Here.
Nystrom,
Here.
Teben,
Here.
Pritchard,
Here.
Melhouse.
Here.
Okay.
Okay. I don't have the agenda printed off. I just got home a minute ago, but as I recall, the first item on the agenda was discussion of curriculum and evaluation. I'm going to turn it over to you, Julie.
Okay, so what we thought we would do for all of you is just go over a little bit of data and information about how students are doing right now. And I think Dr. Janes is going to walk us through the beginning portion, and then our building principals will share out from their building perspective. So we'll start there.
Okay, do I have permission to share a screen? Mitch?
2 seconds. 2 seconds.
That's what I thought.
That's Mitch's decision, not mine.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, now let me see if I can do it. All right, I think it's sharing a document that says a recap of student learning. Thank you for nodding along. All right. So what I put together for an overview is just a very brief recap. Some of this data you may have seen or we've talked about in previous sessions, but just kind of to ground our discussion tonight. Just a recap of some data with the understanding that comparing student learning and data to previous school years is really difficult this school year, as we've talked about many times, and that some of our data is really limited. And so, or we're looking at it in new ways because of the circumstances of student learning in the past 10 months. So with that in mind, we continue to use data and the existing data that we have to guide our supports for our students and the efforts that we're making to close learning gaps. And our principals will speak more to what that looks like at every level. Some structures are different than they have been in past because of mitigation strategies that we've taken, but some pieces are very much still in place, especially that need to ground our decisions and our supports for kids in what we see in the data and using classroom data and as many pieces as we can to try to guide that. So I kind of have 2 questions to guide our beginning discussion tonight, with the first being, how has the pandemic affected student learning since March of 2020? I think we do want to continue to think about school improvement efforts with a larger lens than just a 10-month. 10 months doesn't make a trend. And yet I do think right now that's really where our focus is what has happened for our students since last March, and how do we get back on track with where we intended to be going with our student learning. So the second question is then, how has our return to school this fall impacted student learning when we feel like we've had more control than perhaps we did last spring when we were really in more of a crisis mode? So I pulled a little bit of data to kind of start the discussion, and the principals again can jump in a little bit, but I know I shared with you earlier earlier this fall our K-8 literacy screening data. And that was really just, we got our kids back, and that was our first chance to kind of screen and see where are we in reading and math. And I pulled literacy data because that's the piece that the state has some statewide comparisons. Math is not a required screening measure for those grade levels, but literacy is. So with that in mind, I think when I shared data before, I didn't necessarily have statewide data at that point. But you can see that the chart here shows a comparison that we screened 98% of our kids in grades K-8 this fall. In our Heartland AEA region, 90% of kids were screened, and across the state, 92% were screened. So I just want to commend our teachers and teacher leaders and principals for their efforts at the elementary and middle school level to screen 98% of our students, to find ways to connect with our students in remote learning. I know that's a challenge for a lot of districts, but our teachers and teacher leaders and principals found ways to be creative and do our best to get that initial baseline measure this fall of where all the kids were, regardless of what learning model they were in. And then the second kind of bar on the chart shows where they were, how many, and that's the data that I shared with you previously, what percentage of our kids met benchmark. And this is just for K-6. Statewide 7-8 isn't a requirement. So we screen 7th and 8th graders, but not all districts do. So the K-6 comparison here is we had 60% of our K-6 students meet those literacy benchmarks in the fall. And I know we showed some data, and particularly at some of those, that first grade, second grade level where that learning is so sequential is where we took some of the biggest dips in our learning. But you can see that statewide, we compare pretty closely to our peers. In the Heartland region, 63% of the students that were screened met benchmark, and 61% statewide of those that were screened met the benchmark. And then I just made a little note here in comparison that the last screening period that we had was about a year ago in February of 2020. And at that point, 70% of our students had met the benchmark. So we definitely saw a little tumble in fall, and we expected that, but that kind of just grounds us in what's some data that we have that shows where our students were when they returned to us. And, we don't necessarily have a lot of hard data yet for where we're going and closing those gaps, but this kind of grounds our discussion with the things that we have in the classroom data that we have to show where we are and where we're headed. That is just K-8 data. So for high school data, I pulled just a little bit to ground our discussion here around student learning last spring. And I know in June, we shared some of this data with board members, but we did offer, it was considered voluntary continuous learning for our 9th through 11th grade students at the high school for course completion. But students needed to complete that learning and show mastery of the course standards in order to receive a passing grade for their classes. And if they did not complete that work in spring, then they were given an incomplete, and they had until the end of the first semester here, which was just last week, to complete those courses. And so at the end of last spring, we had 83% of our high school students in grades 9 through 11 that finished all of their core courses. They made sure that we had counselors and teachers advising students as they were working through that work remotely, that, if they focused on their core, if they were struggling, focus in first on those core classes that were needed for graduation. And if they were struggling to complete everything, maybe wait on the electives. So 83% of our students finished all of their core classes during that spring closure. And 74% of our kids finished all of their classes. We were really pleased with that data and with all the efforts that our teachers made to connect with kids, find ways to be creative, to help get them through that coursework so that they were prepared to move on to whatever course came next in our sequence this fall. We didn't want to just end the learning or give them a passing grade for where they were at the point when the closure began. We really wanted to see kids show mastery of those standards in their learning, and the kids really rose to that expectation. As I mentioned, if they didn't complete enough coursework to show mastery, then they were given an incomplete, and students had opportunities in summer and fall to work on that classwork. I don't have final numbers for you, and I don't know if the high school has an estimate for you or not. The semester just ended last Thursday. So my guess is they don't necessarily have those hard numbers yet, but I do know that by early fall, we had 271 COVID credits out there that were credits that hadn't been finished yet, and 203 had been finished by early fall. So we were pleased with the efforts that kids made over the summer and early fall as well. And again, all of our teachers that were making amends for kids and finding ways to be creative and meet their needs. So that's kind of the data that we have that shows what happened last spring to ground our discussion. And then the next question is, well, how are we doing since we've returned to school in the fall of 2020? I think it's important to note that the majority of our students have been able to remain fully on site, attending in person, and that families did have the option this summer to select a remote learning model prior to school starting. And that coursework was taught by Boone Community School District teachers. I know across the state, as I network with other districts, many of the districts offering a remote learning model have that offered through a third-party provider of some sort, like an Edmentum or Edgenuity type coursework provider. And we felt it was important that those classes be offered and taught by BCSD teachers to help really parallel what was happening with our on-site model, so that kids could easily come back if they were ready to. And so that, our goal is to continue to keep those kids as a part of our BCSD system. And so we want it as closely aligned as possible. And we really feel like that best supports our kids' learning and in ways to close the gaps instead of creating more gaps. I know there's research saying when students transition schools, they can lose up to 6 months of learning. And so we want to keep those kids with us and connected to our curriculum. So I think that's an important thing that we've put in place as a mitigation strategy for those gaps, is to align as much as possible all of our students' learning. I have just a little bit of attendance data that I'm able to pull with a new statewide system that kind of is an early warning system. And attendance is important because it matters. There's research that shows that it's one of the most important factors for student achievement. And so I just have a little bit of comparison data for how our kids are doing with attendance this school year. And statewide, the state kind of has set this threshold of students who have attended 90% or more of the school days are considered to be on track with attendance. We know there's absences, but attending 90% of the time is considered kind of on track. So with that in mind, 80% of our Boone students this fall in grades K-8 are on track. They've been attending more than 90%. And you can see the comparison there to other kids in our region, in the Heartland region, and then across the state. We obviously have data that we don't have yet, that I wish I had for you tonight, but it will be coming, and data that we'll watch closely, some more summative assessment measures. We will begin screening for the FAST literacy and math again in winter here. February 8th is the opening of our window. So throughout the month of February, we'll be collecting more winter screening data. Excited to see the growth that kids are making. I mean, I'm sure buildings can share a little bit more about the classroom data, but we really feel like, getting the kids back and being able to provide interventions for them has been key to closing some of those gaps that we saw in our fall data. We will take the Iowa assessment, the ISASP test again in April or early May. And that one is a state requirement. And while folks have considered to ask, at this point it has not been waived. It is a requirement again. We won't have any comparison data from 2020 because that was waived. And that assessment we just took one time, the first time it was released in 2018-19. So we'll carefully make comparisons across those school years, but it will be nice to have another summative measure and see how our kids do with that standards aligned assessment. And then, as I mentioned, the high school has just finished up their first semester. So we're kind of waiting to get in some hard numbers on our course completion rates from last spring as well as this fall. And then, we're always looking at what percentage of our students are on track for graduation with the credits that they have earned at each grade level. So that's data yet to come. SABRS is a screening measure that's related to social and emotional learning and behavior. And I know that our buildings have been using that to help guide some social emotional needs and closely monitoring referral data as office and counselors work with students on their social and emotional learning needs. So that's all data that we are collecting and continuing to use, but some of it just isn't hard and fast data yet. But there's always formative data in our classrooms that we use to guide our decisions. And I've just given you a really big overview, and the principals really have better information about what's happening in our schools and our classrooms and our collaborative teams. That is really the hard work at closing gaps. So I will stop my share, and I'm wondering if you want to go high school on down or elementary on up to share a little bit about what's happening in our classrooms.
Let's start from the bottom and work our way up. One quick question, Jill. When you had those attendance numbers, percentages at 80%, is that just for the kids that are full-time in the classroom, or does that include the ones that are online as well?
That includes all of our students. So it's a difficult pull out of Infinite Campus. And if it hadn't been a snowy day, we may have been able to get that data pulled for you, because I'm curious as well to see, does that 80%, is that similar across the board, or is that differ from our on-site to our online learners? Again, a snowy day, and that data did not get pulled this afternoon. But if that's data that you're interested in, we can certainly share that as we get that pulled, because I do think it would be interesting to note if attendance differs across their models of delivery.
Yep, I was just curious if the online were included at all, and so they are.
They are.
Which is good. Be kind of an interesting comparison, especially I think everyone Julie sent me out that article I found from in Medscapes, which is that evaluated some CDC data that showed that kids who were on in classroom every day actually had lower rates of COVID problems, and so did the faculty, compared to those that were hybrid or online, which I think they analyzed 3 different studies and combined all the data. So thought it was an interesting comparison. So with that said, Autumn, we're going to start with you.
All right, awesome. I just got some dental work done, so part of my mouth is numb. So hang in with me, friends. Yeah, as we look at our data at the elementary level, I think, just summarizing it, our CFAs, which are like our assessments that we do off of our standards that our teachers are teaching, as part of our lesson sequence to meet those essential standards, we're right on target. Kids are growing that are in school and are, doing everything they need to do. We're reaching those targets. We're still able to intervene using the MTSS process. We don't have WIN the same time we always have. And so we've really been pulling teachers and pushing them to intervene for kiddos that are struggling. But our data for those essential standards and focusing through the classroom looks really good. We're meeting our targets. We're meeting our standards. Some of our classes had to go back a bit, especially with phonics instruction, and catch up some holes that had been missed from the spring. But luckily we've been able to do that. And a lot of our curriculum leaves flexibility for those weeks anyway. So we've been able to go back with some of our phonics instruction, start that, and then get right back on pace for our regular instruction to ensure that we've met all the standards by the end of the year. So that was awesome. And that was really good to see. Like Jill said, we haven't got our most recent FAST. That window is coming soon. We'll get that both in literacy and math. Our students that were really struggling, we've been progress monitoring and evaluating their growth along the way. A lot of our students are making growth, which is awesome. One challenge I would say this year that's kind of been different from last year is the students that are struggling. We have to really gauge and see, is it due to COVID? Is it a gap that we need to close, or is it something that we need to look at for child find to see whether or not we need to move forward with that process? So our teachers have been really working hard to collect a lot of data and make sure that we're really gauging, okay, who has a gap due to COVID that we can catch up? Who might have a learning disability? What does that look like? Because at our level, we often catch them if they're struggling that way too. So that's something that we've been working on a lot this year and trying to analyze what gaps are due to the COVID time missed and what gaps are just instructional ones that we need to look at our different types of learners. So that's something that we've been working on a lot. We have our intensive plans in place that are really have a focused goal, a focused data collection tool, and then a team that monitors that data and makes decisions that way. So again, that MTSS, that responding with those multi-tiers of support are still in place. They just look a little bit different this year. One of the questions we were asked to speak to was online students versus on-site students. And I think, one of our biggest struggles with our online students is, especially our little pumpkins, engagement is huge. Not being able to sit next to their peers and pick their favorite colored pencil and talk as they get up and walk and go get their counters. Our online teachers are amazing performers and have tried to do as much as they can to engage students. But for our lower levels, one thing that is really required for success online is parents sitting right next to them, being that proximity person that their classroom teacher and associates would normally be. That's not available for every family. We worked really hard to make sure that parents knew that was a need that needed to happen, so that, before they signed up for that, they knew that was a part of it. Our students that are struggling are the ones that don't have the parents available to sit next to them and offer support throughout their learning time, especially because if you don't know what an A is, you can use other tools to figure out what an A is. We have lots of hand signals and other things like that, but some of those, constrained skills that once you know them, it's really hard if there's not somebody next to you correcting you or helping if you don't know what that site word is or whatever it may be. So I would say that's our biggest hurdle with our data is it's hard. It's intense. Online learning is intense for little pumpkins because we need somebody sitting next to them to correct them and support them and coach them, and even just those little back rubs of proximity that our teachers can't do. They're trying real hard. They're working so hard. I watch them teach and I'm tired. They're amazed at how they engage through the screen. They just can't reach out and touch them. So that's something that, we've struggled with our online learners, is finding ways to do that. However, we've added supports like title reading for our first graders. We've recently added that in through an online module of doing it. Our title teachers are learning how to reach kids through title and sending manipulatives home so they have them in front of them. we've added that other layer of support. Both of our online teachers, well, all three of our online teachers have been able to have interventions in place where they meet with students as well too. So we're trying to, go with some of the MTSS model, even into the online model, for sure. So yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to compare because it's, two different environments that is done really differently. This next go round, there's some benchmarking that we need to do where students really have to read and the teachers really have to look and see how they're responding to the text. And we're going to try to have them come in a little bit for that because that's really hard to get an authentic read of that assessment in person. So we've taken a lot of safety procedures to make sure that that's available for students, that parents feel comfortable doing that. So again, our online teachers have just really been growing in that way. I think one thing that we can really celebrate throughout all of this is our focus on social emotional. I think it's been, we talk about how adults feel during this time and how parents feel, but kids can feel really stressed during this time too, and our teachers have really stepped up their instruction around social emotional skills, and we're seeing that. We're seeing kids who know how to process their emotions and feelings. They know how to be problem solvers, and our teachers are doing the same thing. They're really stepping up new problems. We hit the brother sister phase really early, I like to call it. Normally it's around March, but now because they play with the same friends at recess, they used to by the same friends at lunch, they have the same friends in their classroom. So teachers have been really responsive to, they even have them organizing games at recess for one another and creating stations and doing things to really address the social emotional needs of our students. And Justine Stevens is our family liaison at our level, and she has just been phenomenal at partnering with families and parents and reaching out and calling and supporting and making sure kids have access to resources that they need during this really tricky time. So that's kind of my summary. Any questions that I didn't address for you guys?
Any questions from anyone? Otherwise, thanks, Autumn, for all that you're doing. And we're going to go ahead and move on up. Brad Winters.
Yeah, I would just echo a lot of the things that Autumn said. I think for us, we felt like we were in a really good spot last year before the school closure. And so our focus has really been maintaining as many of those practices as we could amidst a global pandemic. And so I think we've done a really good job of that. We've been on site. I think, like Autumn said, we've continued with our multi-tier system of support, although it looks a little bit different. We've had to be creative this year in meeting some of the needs for more time and support for some of our students. And it hasn't been quite as efficient, which has been tough. But other than that, I mean, I think our kids are making progress. And I think, to echo what Autumn said about the social emotional, that was such a focus for us coming back. And I think it's almost been like our kids are so happy to be back in school with us that, we haven't dealt with maybe some of the issues that we had before just because of that long time being away. Now they're happy to be back, and kind of that excitement and that joy has lasted the whole year just because they've experienced that time without being in school, without being around their teachers or being around their friends. So yeah, I mean, same thing with our summative data on our identified essential standards. Students are making good progress. Every once in a while, our teams will gather some data on a formative assessment or a summative assessment, and students won't be where they expect them to be. And I think part of that is that as they go back, they find out that there was some prerequisite skill that maybe wasn't covered like it normally would because of the school closure. And so we're having to go back and fill in some of those gaps. I would anticipate that as the year goes on and we start tackling some of those standards in math that weren't covered, not that they weren't covered, but they weren't covered the same during the school closure last spring as they normally would be in a regular year, that we'll start having to go back and fill in some more of those. But they're doing, I know we're doing pre-assessments, and which includes looking at prerequisite skills, and also do some of the students already have the skills that are covered in the unit, so that they can individualize the support that they provide for kids So yeah, I think just really good about keeping on what we're doing, and with all the things that have been thrown at us, and still seeing our students make good progress.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions for Brad or Autumn now as we go through the elementary kids? Otherwise, Scott's on board right now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Scott, you're on.
All right. It's been, I'd say, as calm as it can be for being in a middle school this year. I think we still have lots of good things to report. I think it makes us realize sometimes we schedule our own craziness. As we've made some changes with our COVID procedures, we've really liked some of the things that have taken place. And one of the things that Jamie shared with me today was we had looked at our referral numbers, and in fall of 19, we had 264 referrals. And this fall for 2020, we were down to 91 referrals. And so that's a decrease of 173 referrals. And I attribute that to a lot of things. I attribute that to a lot of the procedures that we put in place, the teachers building relationships with kids, the programs that we have set up, and the interventions to work with those kids as they're going through. But just seems like it's been a calm start to the year, and it's just kind of maintained steady. You know, we still have like everybody else, we still have our students that pop up on a regular basis, but for the most part, things have been pretty good. And I think the places that we've really liked has been having a check-in place for students to go in the morning. I think that's important to start off their day, you know, because of the structure. Normally when students come in, they're in the gym and the commons, you know, for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour before school starts. So trying to get them wound back down and ready to go to first hour class, I think creates a challenge, and lots of behavioral issues even with that before school starts. So having all the students go to their homeroom when they get there, and a place to check in, and building the relationships with those teachers while they're there has been a really positive thing. On top of that, going to that homeroom teacher during activity time, instead of having 150 kids in the gym at one time, has been able to space kids out. I think we always notice, especially coming back from lunch activity, that that again, it's kind of, you get worked up and you're playing games and doing stuff, and it's important to burn that energy off. But we have just noticed less problems coming through with passing times. You know, not using lockers during the day has been amazing. Instead of people having things go on in the hallways, they're just walking to their next classes. That's been really good. And the staggered dismissal at the end of the day has also been amazing, as we don't like to spend lots of time supervising after school. Instead of supervising a million people, you've just got your last hour for the last couple minutes as we do that dismissal, and then getting our kids out in that first round of buses on our shuttle. You know, before we had, I don't know, 200 kids for 45 minutes. And now those kids walk straight to the bus and get on the bus. And then we have about 30-ish kids waiting for the next round of buses to come around. So it's much more calm after school, much more manageable. And so we've really liked some of those things that have been in place for this year. Our reading and stuff, we have we've got our reading data day coming up. We've got our reading associates in place. We switched that up a little bit this year. Again, like Brad said, while we don't have win time, we are providing lots of systems of support. While we used to solely use our reading associates to pull and do fluency readings, we're doing those polls to get our whole group numbers. And then we are having those teachers work directly with the reading teacher in the reading classroom. So they're doing small group instruction, and the reading teachers are working with those teachers to be able to rotate kids around based on their needs and what their scores are, to to help in the classroom as well. So that's something that we're doing new this year with our reading associates. Aaron Holm has just started this year. He's been working with Annie Carpenter on the numeracy project. And so that is something that he has been working with special ed teachers, and going to put some more of that in place, which gives us a screener for math. Annie's amazing to work with. And I had a conversation with Aaron the other day, and he just gets so excited when he's into something. And so he's just celebrating that. And the more we get to know it and understand it, and really it's a great program that gives you detailed steps with, this is where you're at, this is what you're missing, and here's 15 interventions, next steps that you need to do for the student to get them to where they need to go. So we're excited to kind of start doing that with our groups. Jamie's been overseeing our MTSS group that meets weekly. That's been awesome as we meet. It's been myself and Jamie, our counselors, Krista, TLC. This year we invited our BD teachers to that, our 5, 6, and 7, 8 BD teachers, because lots of times some of the students that we're working with or focusing on come from their areas. And also our AEA staff are coming to those meetings. So we're able to look at social, emotional, grades. If we need somebody there, the right people are there. So Jamie's done an amazing job with that. We have an ongoing list that we work with of students that are, what we're doing as we go through the meeting, we assign, instead of just talking and complaining, each student, we assign who has a task and what they're going to do and who's going to follow up with those students. So it's just not just a blabber session, we're actually putting stuff into place. So Jamie spends a ton of time and work organizing that and putting that together. So I think that's helped maintain some of our crazy this year. I think as we look and compare, I did a little comparison that Jamie put some numbers together, and I was just running through some of them and looking at some different stuff. I think sometimes maybe even more so at the middle school level, like attendance, I think is more questionable. And from what I've seen from parents that I've talked to, is your kids are old enough that they think they can leave you home all day and trust you to do your schoolwork and log in. And while attendance might mean that you've logged into a class, that doesn't mean you're actually there. That doesn't mean you're actually participating or turning in your homework. And so I think that's been a struggle with the online model. Well, I praise our teachers. They are doing amazing things. The things that they're putting together are awesome. We just need the students to actually participate and do the work and get it done. You know, when I look at our online students, we ran some DNF reports, and we had about approximately 57% of our online students had D's or F's on their grades. And that number was a total of 60 students out of about 105, 110 students. And so I guess the celebration that we have with that is on Friday, we had 32 of those students return to in-person. We really reached out to quite a few families and weren't sure how it was going to go, but kind of pressed them to come back and said, you know, hey, you're failing. We got to get you back into the building. This isn't working. And, you know, some people told us, no, don't care. We don't want to hear about it. We need to be home and safe. And a lot of them said, yes, we understand. We can't be there. We can't manage it. We can't make them log on. We're not doing the work. And so that will be a big piece of, you know, I know that piece of, you know, lots of referrals down is because we've had a lot of those behaviors at home. And so we know with, you know, bringing students back at times that may increase those, but I think the procedures that we have in place are really going to kind of keep things where they're at. So we had 40 students start on Friday. 32 were returning from online or homeschool. And we had another 8 that were starting that were move-ins or coming from other online programs like Cam Academy or somewhere like that. So while we've been not super happy about the results with online, I think it's a positive step to get those students back in the building and in person, because I would say, 100% is a pretty big word, but I'm going to say 99% of those 32 students are returning to on site because they weren't being successful at home. And so, for the right people in the right setting, it is working, and some people are taking full advantage of that. For those other ones, we've really been reaching out and trying to get them back in the building. So that's kind of where we've been at this semester. Anything you want to add, Jamie?
No, just we even have parent meetings set up in the next couple of weeks to get more online kiddos back, and to add to the MTSS, with the social emotional, we came up with a screener. Instead of giving sabers, we kind of did a custom screener that really identified a lot of kids that we wouldn't have otherwise. And so we have really worked hard to create some supports for them. And Krista from YSS, our counselor, have created a lot of different groups to have supports and interventions for them. So we plan to give that screener again before spring break.
Okay. Thank you very much, Scott. A couple questions I have. You said we had about 90 behavioral referrals first quarter, and first all fall, and about 220, 240. I can't remember the exact number. Last year, same time period. What was our census in the school between those 2 years? I know we're down some because of a lot of got 105 online or some. Just kind of curious.
I think in looking at our numbers, we're about, I can't remember where we were at, 50 lower than where we were at total building last year. With 640, we have 110-ish online, and I think that number's down to 77 now left that we have online, kind of divided out between the grade levels.
Sure. So a little bit of that 50% or that decrease to 91 could be our census of kids, not quite as many kids, but a lot of it is probably indeed some of the great things you guys are doing over there for behavioral issues. Second question, those numbers you gave us on online rates of D's and F's are astounding, very concerning. I'm going to assume that the kids that have seats in the classroom, we don't have 50% of them with D's and F's. What would you say that percent baseline comparison?
I split that out and spaced it out, and the average, I think, of the other students when I tried to run a quick number was about 16% that had a D or an F, so quite a bit lower.
Okay.
And I didn't do numbers like if one student had 3 or 4, I just counted by the student.
Sure.
As we put those numbers together. So.
Okay. So there's definitely a difference there.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm glad to hear we're getting some of those kids back, because obviously it looks like some kids can thrive with the online, home-based, and some of them aren't. We need to really try to work on those kids that are not. So, any other questions from board members?
I think the one thing I would add to that also is while we've had that, as we always talk about, just thinking about special ed's always in the back of my mind. Just always sharing with the board our unique challenges, and I think this year has presented. We've just continued to increase in our special ed numbers, and I always feel like as we look at the students that we have come in, it's not necessarily a product of what we've created or what we haven't taught or instructed. So many of the, of the 50, I can't remember what it was, 50 new students at the beginning of the year, a huge number of IEPs, and even just kind of throughout the year and recently, we keep doing intakes from students coming in with IEPs. We just had some this week, a move in from Ames that's been online that we haven't had all year. That's now started in person this week. A couple that have moved in from foster care that have been self-contained and in placements for the last couple of years. So, we still continue to have unique IEP needs and concerns with the students that we just kind of continue to manage. We've had pretty good luck with those kids so far, and have been pretty lucky that some of the behaviors that we've thought we would have coming in, we haven't had to deal with. So, but we have a lot of students, a couple in placements, several that are self-contained that can't make it out to classes and trying to manage those. And I would just, that's another celebration that our teachers that are working with those students are just amazing. So
I was
Great
going
job.
to add to that too, Dr. Milhouse, that I want to commend the teaching staff, the special ed staffs, as well as gen ed staff, that something that we have shifted to this year is as we get these IEPs, and I think historically we have added the supports based solely on the IEPs, and this year we have tried to get them into our environment before we make a shift, so we know that any shifts in supports that we're making are necessary for the environment that they're currently in and not the environment that they're coming from. And that's something I just think, I think that's some of the success that Scott's referring to, is that they had some supports at middle school that maybe they didn't have previously, or the way that they've structured things that have allowed us not to have as many supports and allow them the opportunities for a lesser restrictive environment than what their IEP indicated initially. So I think that's, again, something to celebrate with our staff, because they have worked really, really hard to make sure that we're matching our supports with the actual needs once they're with us, and not based on experiences outside of our district.
Yep, that sounds very good. Just out of curiosity, we heard anything or gotten any open enrollments in from Ames, just because they're still just hybrid at their middle school and high school? I know I'm hearing off the cuff from some of our nursing staff that come over from Ames. They're getting a little frustrated that their kids aren't back in the classroom more than they are. So I was just curious if you heard anything.
I think we had some at the beginning of the year that kind of enrolled in some of our online programming, and a couple that had rolled in person. So I haven't seen huge numbers, but I know a few. And I'd say with what Julie said also, I think our biggest challenge also is when we do need support. I'm just amazed that it seems like there's lots of people that need jobs, but we just can't find anybody to work. We've had an associate position posted for 6 to 8 weeks and can't get anybody to apply for it. So even when we're in a spot where we need 1 or 2 or 3 people, it has been impossible to find the help. And I really expected there to be more people being like, hey, I don't have a job. I'm gonna, looking for work to do, and still just nobody's applying. So
it's tough. It's very tough. So, okay. Any other questions, or else we're going to move up to Chris and Drake. Chris.
Thank you, Dr. Milhouse. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, everybody's frozen, so I just want to make sure that you could hear me. As you can imagine, it's been a rough task over first semester. Some of the things that we were concerned about kind of coming in has kind of come through. Very similar to the middle school, a lot of the online students, that's not necessarily the best environment for our students in a lot of cases. And there's been some struggles in that area. One of the things that we were during first semester that we weren't able to do or prepare for our students are things that we made adjustments for 2 or 3 years ago to make sure that our students were being successful, and we weren't able to do that this first semester. The bright side is that as we continue to look and watch the numbers as our grades are starting to get posted right now, they should be completed later on this week. We have made modifications for second semester that I think will help support our students. Right now, we did see an increase in failures from first semester to second semester, or from first semester this year in comparison to first semester last year. And one of that large numbers was the freshman and sophomore classes. That's concerning. And one of those pieces and one of the interventions that we had in place that we weren't able to utilize was the 8.5 program. And I think that over the last 5 years has shown a really good success in terms of building a great relationship with our students and then giving them an opportunity to get a credit before they even come in and really start the momentum in a positive way. And so that's something that we're continuing to monitor and look at. Hopefully we'll be able to get to 8.5 this summer, really build the relationships with the 8th grade students that are going to be coming in as they transition to the high school this upcoming year. With that said, we continue to see a large, not a large number, but a significant increase in failures. We're monitoring that right now. We're hopeful that that number will come down as final exams are getting graded and grades are getting posted. The bright side right now is that our lowest number of failures are within our 12th grade class. So that's a positive that they are, our 12th graders are really focused in on what's going on and are able to make sure that they're staying on track for graduation. Our online students, of the 90 students that we currently have in online, we have about 39 students that have at least one F, which is concerning to me. In addition, we're excited that we're going to be adding our Spanish teacher for second semester. Students weren't as successful as they have been in the past. So we're excited to have our new Spanish teacher this upcoming semester. One of the things that we did notice is that currently of the students that are failing, we have about 24 students that had Fs in the 1920 school year. And so that's something that we need to keep an eye on so that we continue to progress towards graduation for those students. In second semester, we modified our schedule in order to offer our win time. Again, as an intervention, we felt like it was a need. 3 years ago, we added intervention time because we knew that we needed to have that. And in addition, one of our goals as a staff was to make sure that we're putting very explicit instruction towards life skills, social emotional learning, and things like that. And so that intervention time is also going to double as an advisory time every other week. We're actually in the middle of the first 5 days, which will focus in on some calendar scheduling, just making sure that, to do tasks, things like that, to make sure that we are giving the opportunity for our students to learn how to really manage their time efficiently and effectively with all the modifications and changes that have been going on, as well as making sure that we continue to push forward and make sure that our students understand that they need to be on time with assignments and making sure that they're ready to go as we move forward for second semester. So this week we're going to be working on our flex time and just making sure that we train our students so that they're ready to go in the intervention period coming up. Obviously, it's been really inconsistent with the different models that we've been running over the last 10 months, and we're seeing kind of that effect. One thing that we have worked on, and we actually are going to meet tomorrow, is setting up an intervention for the students that are failing right now. We know exactly why they're failing. They have the standards, and we've identified the learning targets that they need to hit. And so we're going to be working with our TLC program to contact parents and use our power hour at the end of the day to go and actually we'll make phone calls to parents and let them know that we're expecting them to show up for power hour at the end of the day. And the TLC program is going to be going and picking up students at the end of the day and then making sure that they're following through to see if we can get some credit recovery with the grades that are failing right now. So that's kind of where we're at right now when it comes to the failures. In terms of attendance, obviously we took that hit right before Christmas, but I'm definitely content with our attendance. Right now we're running at about a 94.77% on a daily attendance rate. We were running pretty high in the 95% until we were forced to go online before Christmas. So other than that, I'm really proud of our staff. Many of our staff are, teaching online while teaching in person, and that juggle is definitely a difficult situation. They continue to work hard and put our students in the best place possible. And we'll continue to challenge our students to step up to the plate, make sure that they're successful and preparing themselves for graduation. I think that's the one thing that we're going to really truly focus in on is that 9th and 10th grade. We know that if you don't have a very successful start to high school, it's an uphill battle. And so we know that we have some conversations and some things that we need to have with the 9th graders, and we'll start focusing in on that right away next week as we start second semester.
Chris, did you say how many people came back that were online that came back starting second semester?
We only had, I believe it was 8. Is that right, Drake?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
We had about a +6 return. So we had about, I think it was like 10 return, but then a few go out as well back to online with medical notes due to mental health concerns and reasoning. So I think we gained a total of 6 back at second semester.
Okay. You mentioned 24 with F. Was that just the senior class that you were talking about, Chris?
Yes, sir. Only 24. Right now with numbers, we've got about 137 students with an F. At this time last year, we had about 70 students. And so we've seen a double. But like I said, we've had 40 students that are online right now that had 40 students right now online have at least one F. The one thing that I do want to caution with those numbers is those are rough numbers right now. Teachers are still putting in and posting. So from the post number, when we pulled the post numbers right now, numbers look a little bit better than that number. This is just what the 137 students right now was just present grades without the finals. So we're continuing to look at that.
Okay. And then do we have a final number as far as those kids who never got their credit recovery from last spring? They had until the end of this semester.
We don't have a final number. We don't have a final number. I know I was going to meet up with Sarah to see later this week as to how many we got, but we were at 203 credits made up. And I know Sarah Madsen, our online teacher, has been working diligently with our students to make sure that they were making those up. I actually had, I think it was 3 conversations last week on a couple of students that I really challenged them to get it done. It was a matter of finishing 1 or 2 standards. So they're capable of getting that done. And so I'll get better numbers as grades get posted this week.
Okay. And the other question I have is, as I recall, our policy as far as open lunch hour and that type of thing has in the past been that if you have a D or an F, you're ineligible for open campus at lunchtime. Is that still the case, or has that been waived this year?
That was waived due to the COVID limitations.
Okay.
I'm in favor of bringing it back if we needed to. I think we have the space in the lunchroom. I'd be curious as to see what that would do for our lunches. So that might be something that we can investigate too.
And something to add on to that as well is we have one lunch period that's really full compared to another lunch period. So that might cause a little stress. But you are correct in that we had a policy where you'd have a 2.5 GPA and be on track with your credits to earn open campus. And that was semester based.
I'm kind of wondering if we need to look at seeing how we can do with that. Start providing maybe a little bit of incentive here. I'm a little bit discouraged with these numbers. I mean, it's not going to affect the freshmen and sophomores as much because they're not allowed open campus, but our juniors and seniors it might affect.
I think one of the things in terms of monitoring these Fs that might make a big difference is, if we go and we get the students before the end of 8th period, and then we work through making up those Fs, I think that will have a little bit greater effect at this time. They're not going to be able to just leave at the end of the day. We have that power hour built in, and so rather than just letting them leave right at the end of the day, we grab them and we're like, we're not going to let you fail. And I think that's one of the things that we're going to continue to push is, we want all of our students to pass, and we're going to do whatever it takes to get them there. So making sure that we go and grab them and say, we're gonna ride you out till we get you graduated, I think is really important.
Chris, when you said
Questions
you had
from other board members?
137 failures or something like that, it was about double what you had last semester. Does that include your online kids too? Or did you have those pulled out
Yes.
separate? It does. So some of
we
those,
didn't pull it. We put them all together. Yeah.
so some of those essentially maybe have open campus anyway.
Correct. If
Correct.
you subtract that 40, you actually get down to about 95. And then you said last year it was 90, so you really don't have quite as much of a difference, which.
No, and I truly agree. I feel like, and we had 24 students that were repeat F offenders, so I think it's a greater number. It did increase. Dr. Melhouse, last year it was after first semester there was 70, so there's been a little bit of an increase.
Well, I thought you
but
said
we did
90. I'm
see a
sorry.
No, you're fine. I just wanted to clarify that. But we
Okay.
saw a significant increase in the 9th and 10th grade. And so, I think we've done, over the last few years, we've done a lot of things to help support in those transitions. And we know that, that transition from 8th to 9th grade is so crucial. And we've seen a lot of success with the 8.5 program, with the 9th grade academy, those type of things where they're building really great relationships. And this environment has not been conducive to that. And so I think by putting the advisory in, putting a win time in, hopefully we start going in the right direction. And obviously with some of the interventions and the MTSS processes that we're going to be working on, hopefully we can, turn it in the right direction.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any board members, any other comments, questions for any of our administrators?
I just wanted to add one more thing for the high school. Sorry.
Go
Something
ahead.
a positive too. We talked about attendance, and that's been pretty decent actually through this strange year. But during our finals time, our attendance was 98%, which is probably one of our higher days. So those last 3 days during finals, a lot of our kids were getting in and taking care of business and finishing what they need to do to wrap up the semester.
That's great news. That's very good. So hopefully we'll get off to a good start for next semester. So, okay. Professional development, Julie?
Yeah, we're going to go back to Dr. James again to give the broad overview, and then our principals will share kind of their a brief summary of what is yet to come. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. James.
And I'm going to share screen again because I work better with with visuals. So what I have here is an overview of our professional learning in 2020, 2021, and really we're goal oriented. So our professional learning thus far in fall and what's planned for spring is really aligned with our board goals for student achievement, and in social emotional learning, standards-based learning and grading, and then our portrait of a graduate work. And I've just kind of detailed just briefly what has currently been done or what teachers have engaged in and support staff in fall related to each of those. All of our staff took part in some educator self-care with kind of an social emotional learning lens in the fall. Each building has been implementing various things. And they all spoke to social emotional learning and the effects that they're seeing with kids. And there's obviously been some professional learning behind that this fall. With standards-based grading, the grading piece has been focused on at the high school with monthly learning, new learning, and then support in their PLC collaborative team time for that standards reference grading shift that we've made at 9-12. But then PK8 teachers continue to work in their collaborative teams weekly and with those early release times on aligning their assessments and defining mastery. And those are some of the beginning stages to that standards reference grading and reporting, as making sure you have aligned assessments and everything is streamlined. So that work continues this fall. And then with Portrait of a Graduate, Mrs. Treppa has been leading that, and she has done an introduction to all of our staff at the beginning of the year on Portrait of a Graduate, and then has done some initial work with our district-wide SIAC and district lead learning teams and the teachers on those teams. And then this spring, if you jump down a line, she'll continue that work with an initial brainstorm at all building levels, and then some expanded work with communities and parents. And then obviously the in-depth work comes next as she forms a smaller committee that will continue on in the Portrait of a Graduate work. And then you can see in spring, sorry, I've jumped around on my chart. It's bugging me that I'm not going left to right. In spring semester, our Teacher Quality Day was an optional day of professional learning, but it included some pieces with social emotional learning. At 9-12, the AEA is going to be leading some monthly work with our high school staff. And that one is really social emotional learning, but with an equity lens, and work on taking multiple perspectives and helping our kids to be able to do that. So we're digging into that work this spring. And then each building has more professional learning related to social emotional needs of their kids. And with the standards-based grading, the middle school staff will begin some work with proficiency scales and continuing to work on defining mastery. And our PK4 teams continue that work in their collaborative teams as well. So that's kind of what's on the docket. They can go in more in depth for you about what's going on this year, but I just kind of want to briefly scroll down here to show a little bit of alignment here in the work that we've done. The chart in the middle here that spans several school years since 17-18 is one that you've seen before, but it's color coded now, so it's special. It's been made extra special. And that's due to some work with teacher leader teams that began last year in looking at a need for an instructional framework that can really guide us in our discussions around effective instruction in the classroom. And our teacher leader teams latched on to Marzano's framework for instruction because of its really close alignment and tie to the larger efforts that we begun in 17-18 and the last several years in our collaborative teams and really being a professional learning community. And so that effective teaching in every classroom fits in to kind of just this larger framework. So I'm giving this to you to help everybody kind of understand that when we talk about instructional framework and doing some work around instruction and effective instruction with that Marzano piece, it is a piece of a puzzle that we started putting together several years ago. So it isn't necessarily a new thing. It's just another layer that was a part of our plan all along. So what we like about that framework is how nicely it parallels with everything that we've been working on for school improvement. And so I kind of color coded. You can see over the last 3 school years, we've done lots of work at the first kind of level there in the colored stair step chart, that a safe, supportive, collaborative culture is a first step to school improvement. And 3 years ago, we really dug into that collaborative culture piece and being a professional learning community, organizing those collaborative teams. And you've heard us talk time and time again about the effect that's had and the work that our teachers and our teams do with collaborative culture. I think there's still some work to be done there when we talk about social emotional learning, and that's obviously one of our goals. And so then when we think about safe and supportive and collaborative culture, there's still a little bit of work to be done there as we continue. But we've put a lot of efforts in, and you can see a lot color coded in the chart over the last 3 years of professional learning work that was done in that area. Effective teaching in every classroom was a place that we felt like we had a hole, and that's why some teacher leader teams, especially the instructional coaches, really dug into different instructional frameworks and settled on this Marzano framework as really paralleling the work that we've already been doing. And it's a next step for us because we know that we get the most support for our kids out of that classroom level and the teaching that goes on. And so we initially had the instructional coaches and administrators look at instructional frameworks and settled on the Marzano work, but we were kind of stopped for a bit in those efforts with COVID. So we're delayed a little bit in some of that implementation, but you can see on the blue, anything highlighted in blue is the work we intend to do with really effective teaching and learning and aligning that to a framework that gives us all a common language. And then that third level, that green level of guaranteed and viable curriculum, is work that again, our teams have been doing for the last several years with really, you hear us talk about essential standards, you hear us talk about aligning learning targets and assessments and all that work happening in those collaborative teams. And that work continues to be a part of our professional learning as we work to get better and better at that process. And then the yellow pieces are the standards reference grading and reporting. And those are pieces that we started last school year and continue to work on in this school year that you'll see throughout that chart. So as our principals share what they have going on in their buildings this year, and as we bring forth to you in the coming months what we'll be doing with professional learning, we want to start to kind of use this color-coded framework to help us think about the work that we're doing and being connected to this larger purpose of school improvement. And so with that in mind, I kind of just highlighted at the bottom that the implementation of that instructional framework really begins this spring with some intensive learning for teacher leader teams and our administrative team to help bring those pieces back and think about ways that we can help build that common language around instruction and improved instruction with all of our teaching staff. We want to continue the expansion of social and emotional learning when we're thinking about a safe and supportive culture. And then there's still some additional learning to be done around standards reference grading and reporting. And of course, every building have different needs. So some may have more need for that guaranteed and viable curriculum work and be giving their teams more time for that in professional learning. Others may feel like the social emotional learning is a piece to focus, and they may focus in a little bit more on that safe and supportive collaborative culture. But when we talk about each building doing different things, it's because they may have a different need wrapped in under this framework that's going to guide us in our continued improvement. So I bring that to you to kind of help you compartmentalize when it feels like there's a lot going on and help you see how they all fit together and with purpose. And I'll turn it over now to the principals.
Okay, sounds good. Since we're starting to get a little pressed on time, let's just get a 5-minute summary from each principal to try to keep things moving, because I'd like to be able to get out of here by 7 o'clock. If possible. So we're going to go backwards this time. We're going to start the top down. Chris?
Sounds good. As we've done PD most of this year, we focused primarily on standard reference grading as well as social emotional learning. At the beginning of the year, we primarily looked at assessment. What does a good assessment look like? We have had some magnificent professional development that our instructional coaches have helped support when it's looking at standard reference grading. We are excited. Our next pieces of standard reference grading, we're going to be talking about feedback. What does that look like? And making sure that it's timely. And we just met on Friday and we're working that out. But what are some expectations for second semester when it comes to grading? So we'll be doing that on February 3rd. And then we met with the AEA staff and have been putting together a presentation on social emotional learning and making sure that our teachers are using self-care to make sure that they're taking care of themselves prior to, we know that if you take care of yourself, we'll see success with our students as well.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much, Chris. I'll move on down here to Scott. Where'd you go? You moved on my screen there. There you are. Scott.
All right, we are, like Jill said, we're just kind of in that process, about a year behind. We would have liked to push more a little bit this year, but I know with making online available to all students, we stole lunches and planning times and don't really have the time to, well, we're moving forward, just not quite as quickly as we would like. So not that that's a bad thing though, because I think as we're working through the year, we've got teachers that have read charts are looking good, still working on unit plans, comparing assessments, preparing for that. So as we come into the end of this semester, we're introducing some work on proficiency scales. We haven't hit that point yet. So that's kind of our target this year, is to have our teacher leaders introduce some of that work. I just ordered some resources today through the AEA to help guide our staff through that transition. And as we work through proficiency scales and prepare to fully implement the following year, we have a couple groups that we're going to work with to do some pilots next year. So we're looking at our literacy team, at our reading, doing some pilots, and our language arts classes that have been doing some of that work and already participated in that work. Keith Lehman, who was in Des Moines, we have a few teachers that we've brought in that have already worked through SRG platform, so to help share that. And so we're working closely with AEA, our teacher leaders. We've stole some materials this year from the high school as they've been sending out and educating parents and getting people to understand that progress, that situation of what it means and what it looks like and what to watch for. We're going to use that information next year in our, that year leading up to our implementation to educate our community of middle school parents on what to expect and what it's going to look like. So when we're ready to roll out the following year, that we feel like we'll be in a pretty good place. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott. Any comments yet from the board members? I don't see anything, so we're going to move on down to Brad.
I think for us this year, with having to change so many things, I think the focus has been trying not to implement too many new things. I think we've really been working hard on getting better at some of the things that we implemented over the last couple of years with the new phonics resource that we've used, a new our comprehension toolkit, which works on metacognitive strategies, comprehension, and some of those other tools. And like I said, just continuing to use those more effectively and get better at them. So yeah, that's really been our focus as far as professional development. And then again, keeping that focus and collaboration of, developing clarity around standards, looking at data, figuring out how we're going to provide interventions for our students who need more time and support.
Okay, thank you very much, Brad. Autumn, we'll hear comments from you, and then we'll tag team the two of you as far as any questions.
We've been pretty similar to Brad in that we have some new initiatives that we've been working on the last couple of years as we have been responsive to data. We have our new phonics program, we have our new comprehension toolkit, and then as we're still working and unpacking standards. I had quite a few new staff members this year, so that's been part of the mix too. And I feel like in a year like this, we've also had to go back and really redefine our culture as we have some new safety procedures and standards that we need to be using to interact with one another. But yeah, we continue to build in our essential standard work. A lot of our time has been spent on how, without win time, maximizing our time efficiently, how we've been able to meet the needs of our students to ensure that kids who are struggling or not meeting the standard have a response team ready on the go. That's been a huge piece of this year for sure. So yeah, we're going to continue that work. We have some more work ahead with the comprehension toolkits. Again, moving forward and becoming better at what you already have in place, since we are asking our teachers to do a lot of new different things this year. We're just really trying to hone in on our skills and support our systems that we already have in place. That professional learning community is key. So yeah, we've been working on the same things.
Okay, sounds good. Board members, any questions about professional development from any of the four of you? Jeremy, you got your mic on.
I was gonna ask Jill, just curious what the attendance is for the optional teacher quality days. I know they're always really good. I want just roughly what percentage of staff attends those usually.
Just a minute. I do have that, but I don't have it off the top of my head. If you'll give me a moment, I can pull it up. Okay. We've seen, I was curious this year too. We have seen with, over the last several years that the date matters, the time of year that we pick matters. And obviously this year, COVID-19 matters and the stress of teaching through a pandemic. So we held our teacher quality day in 17-18 in December. That year we had 133 teachers attend. In 2018-19, we held it the day before Thanksgiving break on a Wednesday. We had 152 teachers attend that day. We had held it on a Friday right before school started. We tacked on an extra day of professional learning in 1920 in August before back to school. That year was low attendance with 116 teachers, and this year's attendance was 93. We did have some teachers this year who were also unable to attend, and that they were perhaps out with various reasons related to COVID-19. So I know that was also a challenge.
And what's the total number of teachers we employ?
Mitch?
160.
Oh, wow. So we were getting 3/4 of them a lot of the times, or close to it.
Yep.
So that's pretty good. Thank you.
That's a pretty good number. And this COVID is a unique year, I think, all around. So I'm not sure we can lay too much substance to that one year in the 90s. I'd be more interested in a trend next year or the year after. So, okay, sounds good. Any other questions from board members? Hearing none, we're going to move forward. Julie, I think this is traditionally the January meeting is when we board members when we start about staffing for next year. So
yeah, it is about when we start talking about staffing, and part of the issue also is that we don't have a lot of the registration numbers yet. So what I'd like to start with is I'm going to share my screen as well and just show you where we are with regard to maybe I'm not. I need to find out why it's not showing up I'm not on my work computer, so that's part of the problem probably. Let me just see what I can do to get that. There it is. Okay, so I wanted to be able to share with all of you kind of the numbers. And so one caveat to this, when I asked for the numbers from Tanya, the 1920 numbers are likely more from the end of the year. So it's not a for sure apples to apples comparison. So I want to be very upfront about that. However, the piece that I do want to point out is that in the fall, we shared with you that our primary numbers were down, that a lot of our families decided to take an extra year with their students at home. So you can see that from 1920 to 2021 at Page and Lincoln, our numbers were fairly significantly down. What has increased dramatically are our pre-K 3 numbers. As you might recall, our 3-year-olds are students that have been identified as having some special needs. And so they're integrated into our 4-year-old preschool programs. In addition to that, what's not on this chart is that we do have 7 4-year-olds with IEPs as well. So the teachers that are supporting our students with some special needs in preschool, the 4-year-old preschools, you've got right now currently 9 with 5 more in process, and the 7 4-year-olds. And so that's a very large number. It doesn't really even matter how big of a school district, that is still a very large number. And also looking into the fall, we've been told that we're looking probably at 12 or 13 to start the year. And that's before the school year even starts. So I just want to make sure. So right now our plan is to keep our personnel flatline, that our FTE would be the same. But keeping in mind that if we get back the students that we lost in kindergarten and that maybe just didn't come to school and they decide to come back, we may need to add some staff. But if that stays low, then we'll just shift the staff accordingly to where we need them. I think that, so there are several things that will help us in the planning processes that are currently happening. Tomorrow night begins the start of preschool registration. And so that's the thing that will help us immensely with our preschool numbers, knowing how many are registering for that. Free t-shirts are a big draw, it would appear. So we're hoping that that will continue to increase the interest in preschool. The other thing that we are going to do that's different than previous years is in March, I'd like to send an informal survey out to the entire district, all of our families, to get an idea of how many plan to come back. So we have at least a tentative number before we hit a season where it's more difficult to attain teachers. And then actually have everyone in the district register in July. I discovered upon arriving here in Boone that we had only had our new families doing the registration process. And that makes it extremely difficult to know how many students you're losing until you start school and you don't see them in the seats anymore. So we will have a formal registration process for every family, whether they're new to Boone or returning to Boone this summer, because that's how you plan. That's how you're able to make sure the staffing is accurate and you don't end up with a lot fewer students in a classroom than you think, or a lot more students in the classroom. So those are some registration differences that we're going to undertake to try and make sure that our personnel that we hire match the needs of the district. So right now our goal is just to stay with the FTE that we currently have. We're hoping to, and we're able to do that because of the ESSER II funds that we're receiving. We're able to move some of those general funds around to accommodate for the loss of revenue that we would be seeing next year. But we also hope to realize some savings from the early retirements that we received as well. So those are some of the ways that we're trying to ensure that our FTE stays the same to accommodate the needs of the students. But I will be continuing to provide updates once we have more formal numbers from preschool registration and our informal intent to return forms. And then obviously this summer when we do a formal registration process.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Just make sure those t-shirts don't say doors on them. Make sure they have tour doors on them.
They say little toradors because that's what they are.
And
Little
our PTO purchased them for us out of the kindness of their heart. So make sure you shout out to the PTO.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the PTO for all their help. That's a different little story with the doors comment. I think Mr. Collins and Julie and I were able to get that settled over the weekend. It was a somewhat comical in a way. Got blown totally out of proportion. But that's under control. And Julie, real quickly, I'm going to assume that this summer when we make everyone register in July, that they're not going to have to come and do it in person. They can do it we'll have a computer app to do that.
It'll be online.
Okay.
In fact, we want them to do it online, not in person. That also will help those families that have 4 or 5 students in our system. They won't have to fill out 4 or 5 different forms. It can all be utilizing Infinite Campus information that's already there. There's just double checking what's there and making sure it's accurate. And then something else that will be helpful, I think, to our families is in the past, they've had however many children they have in different buildings is the different number of bills they receive for registration costs, and it will be one, and they won't have to have several different pieces of paper telling them that they owe money to the school district. It will all be on one sheet, and they'll be able to see where the costs are coming from, what the registration costs are for. So hopefully that will help, and also help us in attaining the registration costs on a more timely basis than what we've been able to do in the past.
Okay. That sounds very good. Glad to hear this. Board members' comments about this. This is we just probably got about the 10,000 foot level right now, and each month we'll hopefully bring it down a couple thousand feet. As far as what we're doing, what the State House does for us is also going to play a role in this. So Any comments from board members?
Julie, at this point, do you think we'll offer an online option in the fall or not?
We were trying very hard to look at that to see if that was an option. Our concern is that those that really would like the online option and what they like about our system is that it's our teachers teaching it. And that is the struggle right now, that if we're going to maintain the staffing that we currently have, and I don't know how we will be able to provide it in the same manner that will meet the needs of our students. Because as I think Dr. Janes alluded to previously, some of the schools have utilized some other entities and they have not found as much success as we have with our online system. So that is something that we explored pretty in depth. We did check with some companies to see if they could provide some of the staffing. I'm not sure that we'll be able to provide the same rigorous and curriculum that's in alignment with our on-site students that we were able to do this year and still have our staffing and be on site fully next year. So I don't know that we would be able to offer what we have right now in the same manner without adding a bunch of staff members.
Do you think it's possible the governor just makes that decision for districts and says no online, or will there always be districts offering an online option?
I think the online will always be there like it has been in the past prior to COVID. That's been an option for families. We'll see what the future brings.
The department did release some guidance last week on everybody's minds around what it takes to be approved as an online provider, and information for school districts to connect with others who've already gone through that process prior to COVID, when when there was just a few districts like the Des Moines district. I know you'll see their billboards are here, their advertisements on TV for their virtual academy, and there are some others who have done that. So they're releasing that guidance now as schools consider if that's something they're interested in. And I had a network meeting on Friday, and I'm now scheduled for another follow-up meeting in a couple of weeks with some other districts who are just looking into or considering or kicking around ideas. But the same struggles are in every district of how do you continue to offer that, especially if the numbers are less, so that you don't have a class of first graders that need online, but you have 4 or 5. How do you meet that need for quality instruction with your own staff? And that's a challenge. So we're not alone in that challenge, but we don't necessarily have great answers.
And I think that's the key, that as we've been looking at this, because we have been looking at this for several months actually, because I don't think we go back to normal, so to speak, when we go back on site. All of the principals have referenced pieces that they've implemented as a result of COVID that have been positive pieces to their respective buildings. And I think we'd be remiss not to explore that at the district level as well. But I don't want to compromise the level of rigor or relevance to make that happen. So if we're going to do it, I want to make sure we're doing it well, and it's not a subpar opportunity. It needs to be quality. So if we're going to do it, we're going to do it well. So that's why you haven't heard anything from us, because we have not come up with a structure that we are confident would meet the same level of rigor and relevance that we have this year.
I'm just going to make some comments about COVID right now. I think that not necessarily on the agenda, but this is just a discussion. Number one. Number two, this does affect our staffing. So as far as COVID goes, the vaccine is going to be our big answer here. Vaccine is barely even being studied in kids 12 years and under. So I don't think our kids probably will be seeing that vaccine before the start of the fall. That being said, I think that our educational staff, our support staff, as our school employees, I'm hoping to see them get vaccinated in the next 30 to 45 days. The big holdup is going to be supply of vaccine in the county. Right now, county, we are hoping, we are hallucinating, we're praying that we're going to get about 400 doses a week in February. Now, that's a lofty dream right now, but if we do get that, the state rules state that county Department of Public Health, we're supposed to use half that dosage or 200 dosages on our 1B1, which is basically teachers, and the other half, the other 200 units on our age 65 and over. That being said, considering, Mitch, how many employees do we have?
About 375.
Got 375 employees. So that means if I got 200, if we get 200 vaccines a week, that means it would take us 2 weeks to get 400. But you got to also remember that Madrid United and Ogden would be included in that too. So you figure those districts combined probably have another 400. So cowboy math would say we got 800 dosages or 800 teachers to immunize. That means it's probably going to take until the end of the month for us to get all the teachers in the county immunized.
And that's just with first dosage.
That's with first dosage, and then we do the second dosage. Once you get the first dosage, you have immunity basically after about 7 to 10 days. And so, and as long as you get your second dose between ideally 4 weeks, Fauci just said last week he's willing to extend that up to 6 weeks, but no more than 6 weeks. Your immunity is long term, at least a year, and probably more from what is coming out on some theories and looking at some other scientific numbers. So that being said, means that hopefully our teachers would have, those who would want to have the vaccine will have it by the end of February. The other thing there is we need to encourage our teachers to get that vaccine. We need to get at least a 70% penetration in our teacher support staff and all to work on the herd immunity effect. So if all that is said and done, hopefully we would be back to a situation in the fall where majority of our staff would have the vaccine, so we can get back to some semblance of normal, and we can get that state nationwide. We can maybe get rid of some of our masking issues by the end of this calendar year, December, January. But the big problem is going to get that 70% nationwide vaccine rate for herd immunity. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of what to expect going into the fall from a staffing standpoint. So.
Dr. Milhouse, how's that gone in the medical community? Has that been supported, like, with you guys being the first ones kind of getting in there? Are people jumping in and getting it 70% in the hospitals and doctors, or is it slow for people to want it?
You know, initially a month ago in December, there was a survey out. We did a survey in early December of our hospital staff. We got about 33, 35%, which was similar to a national study that was done at the same time. We are now up to about 64, 65% in our hospital have already had at least one dosage. Physician-wise, we are at 100%. And those other, that's 65%. That seems to be growing by the week. Our goal is to get that over 70, 75% in the hospital. I'm cautiously optimistic that in the next 2 to 4 weeks, we'll get to that point. If you look at that same survey that nationwide said 30, 35%, that survey was just redone last week and it was up to close to 65 to 70%. So I think that the national opinion on this is increasing every week. People are discovering that those who have gotten the vaccine have not grown a horn in their head, have not grown an extra arm, or anything like that. And so I think most people are excited to get it, and I think the majority will. We just need to work on that to get to that 70-75% mark. Early on, there was concerns about this mRNA and pregnancy, reproductive age, etc. I will say that back in December, early December, had some similar concerns, but more I've read, this stuff is perfectly safe. And just to prove it's safe, ACOG, which is American Academy of OBGYN, they've come out to say you should offer this shot to all pregnant women, just like you'd offer them the flu shot or the tetanus shot during pregnancy, which are 2 routine vaccinations during pregnancy. Society of Fetal Maternal Medicine, which takes care of the high-risk OB patients, they have the similar statement: give it like you give a flu shot. So those 2 organizations normally have a problem getting them to agree to give them a Tylenol tablet to someone pregnant. The fact that they have come out that much in favor tells me that this stuff must be pretty good and pretty safe. Though they've got experts on epidemiology, infectious disease, and they've had more access to and have read more literature than I'm ever going to read on this subject. And I have to agree, be happy with their endorsement. So that gives you a little bit of an update as far as staffing trends, staffing issues. Other questions, Pam?
Yeah, I'd like to step back to how we're going to figure out enrollment for sure, because right now the legislature is proposing really loosening up open enrollment, charter schools, and vouchers. And just reading some things that came out today, parents will have a lot of ability to choose if they decide they want their kids to go to a different district or to go online with a different district. So I think we just need to be aware of that, just because, you know, we don't have any control too much over what they decide to do at the legislative level.
It sounds to me like the education bill made it out of committee, I heard on the news. So that is not good news.
No, I think that this is a concerning issue for all of us in public education. We need to be talking about our friends, neighbors, legislators, expressing concerns. Because it's definitely could have an effect on not only Boone Community Schools, but all public schools in the state of Iowa. That's very concerning. It's my big concern is it's going to penalize the have-nots, there's lower social economic with all these bills that are being passed, and there's going to be unintended consequences. But yes, indeed, we've got to be looking at that as far as our enrollment numbers for this coming fall.
I think that just justifies some of the extra measures we're going to take, Pam, to have a better handle on our numbers. So it's not that we aren't going to continue exploring online opportunities, but again, I think it's really important that what we offer is of quality. So that's just stay tuned. If we can kind of overcome some of the obstacles that we're looking at right now, then we'll come to you and let you know. But that's where we stand right now, is that we are not ready to announce anything in particular with regard to that opportunity to continue online options.
Yeah, Julie, I think your idea of having a total enrollment across the whole district is a very good idea. I think that'll help for planning. You know, it'll just be a sensible thing to do here.
It'll make it a lot easier for the staff. Go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say, to stem kind of off that, Julie, do you anticipate in that survey putting in there families that are anticipating or wanting the online option again for next year? Are we going to kind of
We
TBD
have
on that?
surveyed our current online students, so we have an idea of what that looks like already. As far as where they were, I would anticipate we'll probably ask again. As you know, from the fall, when we asked the same question twice, sometimes we didn't get the same percentages. So we'll likely go ahead and ask again, but we do have some preliminary numbers as to which were really intent on an online program, whether it be in Boone or elsewhere. We have a good handle on that, I think. And that's one of the reasons we were looking at trying to provide that, but we are limited in that we aren't going to be able to add staff to do it. So we need to find ways to do it without adding staff.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much. Other questions, concerns from board members?
Oh, Brian, I just wondered, back to COVID-19 vaccinations, has the school district thought about having a clinic for teachers and staff? I'm just curious.
That issue is Julian is working with Deb Stotnick, who is head of the public health nurses, or director, and basically what the public health department is planning on doing is we'll have the 65 and older, that group will be one clinic, and the other clinics for employee-based ones for the high-risk employee groups, we are planning on taking those out to the employee sites. We will be sending, this is putting on my other hat right now, but we'll be sending out one or two public health nurses, along with possible volunteer pharmacists or two from the community, along with some other hospital staff nurses to do those vaccine clinics. Probably recommend that we do them like on Friday afternoon. That way, if there's any side effects, you get through those over the weekend so that by the following Monday, the staff is back to full. At the hospital, we've had a couple people miss a day or two of work after the vaccine. Not exceptional numbers. The Moderna vaccine, which is the one we're using here in Boone County, tends to have more problems with the second shot than with the first one. And I'd say we saw that here in Boone. Our hospital employees last week and this coming week are getting their second dosages. But the plan would be to have hospital nurses coming out and doing it massive one day. Deb Stotnick and her crew will work with Julie and our school nurses to get this set up, and all the teachers and support staff and all. You're gonna want the vaccine. They're gonna probably have to go to one location, probably the high school gym or the middle school gym, depending upon which one is available, to do it. Right now, Mrs. Stotnick's thought is the first group we do with this first set of vaccine, first 200 or so we got, where we hope to get next week would be to do the pre-K 1 teachers and support staff along with our special ed teachers, since they are probably the highest risk teachers we've got as far as exposure to COVID. And then in future weeks, as we get more serum coming back to the schools, to get the rest of the teachers. That's preliminary right now. Again, 5,000 foot view as far as what's happening. Julie, any other comments?
Just that nothing's been finalized at this point. I shared out with staff, Pam, what has been finalized because things keep changing. So the last thing I want to do is promise things to the staff that don't come to fruition. So I've let them know what I've been told by the public health nurse, and we will do everything we can to make sure it happens as swiftly as possible because I think everyone's very anxious to participate. So
remember, I'm dreaming with those 200 a week. Okay, that's our dream goal. Ideally, get more than that, but until we actually see that serum sitting in the public health nurses' offices, we're not going to do anything as far as guaranteeing any clinics organize any official clinics. Any other questions? Otherwise, we're going to adjourn this meeting. We'll see you folks in 2 weeks' time. Thank you everyone for participating tonight. Thanks to anyone who happened to be listening on the television station. Since we must have been better than what the newscast was tonight. Have a good night.